It is so good to see your faces. I've missed you these past couple of weeks, but the Lord has given us a great work in Asia, and I'm excited to get a chance in future times to talk to you a little bit more openly and freely about that. Thank you for allowing Benjamin to preach to you a couple of weeks ago. It's great to see a young man answering the call of God to preach, and I think we ought to be a proving and training ground for young guys coming up. We have others in this congregation who have expressed such a calling, and so our pulpit's got to be available to beginners as well. We've spoken in our journey through Exodus. We're going to pick up in Exodus 3, but we've spoken in Exodus about the here of life, about sitting by the well, about the contemplation that comes from being dissatisfied with where we're at. I don't know what your here is like. It's probably a place that you like in part and you hate in part. Some of you are just getting started in life. Great to see some new babies among us. Some of you are just getting started in life and your here is brand new. You don't even know what to think about it yet. Others of you, you're here where you're at right now in your life is a place of pain and difficulty and uncertainty. Some of you, you are looking for a great deliverance, but you don't even know what deliverance would be like. You've lived this way so long that you've forgotten that there could be something else that God could do. Some of you just survived this morning. You showed up, you never found your left sock. You just went with it. And you got here, and you're hoping that something, you don't know what, but you're hoping that something is going to move you off of here. And today, we want to begin talking about there. So this whole passage, this whole collection of sermons is about going from here to there. The problem for us is generally we know what we want there to look like. And we want to get God on our team to be our passenger and just give us some tips for the drive. We want Him to get us past the potholes and the road markers and all that kind of stuff and tell us how to have our best life now. That's what we want God to do. We want God to take us from our here to our there. And the problem is God never takes us from our here to our there. He takes us to His there. And that is a terrifying, high-risk effort. God's there is scary. It's unknown. In some way, it's pie in the sky. Have you ever thought about heaven? You ever thought about what that's going to be like? I mean, it would be easy if heaven were actually, clouds and we sitting on clouds playing harps. That seems super boring, but it's super easy to imagine. But heaven is a new heaven and new earth. The glory of God existing eternally or everlasting with humanity. A remade, resurrected body. You will be bodily in heaven. And what is that like? What age will you be when you live everlasting? Some of you are like, man, 25, going with 25. That's when everything was perfect, right? It was on the tilt over. If you're over 25, you're moving downhill. I know they say 40, but it started way earlier. You're tipping over. The body's starting to slow down. You feel it. If I worked out, so about 2 days ago, with this little app that tells me what I'm supposed to do to work out, and I got an award. If mediocre were an award, I got it 2 days ago from my fitness app. I worked out twice in January in 2023, and then I worked out a bunch from August to December, And then I didn't work out again until 3 days ago. That's how consistent I am. And I got an award from my fitness app. Listen to this. This is not a statement of how good I am. This is a statement of how bad the rest of us are. I'm in the top 10% of consistency in workouts. Hey, I don't make up the trophies. I just receive them. Send them my way, right? But God's there is like nothing you've experienced. That's the thing. And it's scary to go somewhere you haven't experienced. It's scary to put ourselves in somebody else's hands, to take us we don't know where, to accomplish we don't know what, to cause us to work in ways that we may be uncomfortable with. Nobody can plan their way to God's there. So the question is, how would we get there? Today, I want to talk about accepting a new direction in life. Here's the reality. Your old direction has probably repeatedly led you to dead ends, and you've squirreled your way around for a solution, and you've met a new dead end. So if you want to keep living for dead ends, then keep on doing what you're doing. But if you want to find God's there, that place of blessing and hope, then you're going to have to yield and accept a new direction, a new plan from God. This means, leaving behind an existence outside the presence of God, because you don't get to God's there outside of God's imminent presence. A life of there is a life in the presence of God, and certainly that's what heaven is. If it's anything else, it is that, the presence of the glorified Christ among us permanently. Not just spiritually as we are now, but physically as He is and as we will be in that glorified place. And that direction, accepting that direction, is about practicing the presence of God all along the path. And we're going to see how God introduces that to our boy Moses here. In Exodus chapter 3, we're going to just cover a small portion of this broader narrative. We have brought ourselves up to this place in previous messages. You can go back online and check those out if you missed them. I really encourage it because this passage depends a little bit on those. Exodus chapter 3, 1 to 12. I want to read out a portion of this and then we'll roll into the rest of it. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then God said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the Lord, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Lord, we ask as we continue in your word this morning that you would guide us in accepting this new direction you're laying down for us. Lord, you see and you know and you understand where life is right now. So give us your wisdom in us getting on board with your plan. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want you to see what's going on here. This is the famous burning bush passage. God appears to Moses. Moses is keeping the sheep. He's doing the only thing he has left in life to do. He is fully embodied the here, the now. He is stuck. He thought life was going another direction. It's gone this direction instead. He thought he had a calling from God, only to turn up empty. And so he's doing the last thing he knew to do, which is keeping the flock of his father-in-law. In our previous passage, he had named his son Gershom. I've become a stranger in a foreign land. I mean, even his son, every time he called to him across the tent, reminded him that he was in exile. And so here he is in a broken place with a broken plan, too old, too much water under the bridge. Listen, when you get older, if you're young, just starting out, you young guys, there are so many paths. There are too many paths in front of you. But as you get older, here's what happens. Your money, your life, your house, your possessions begin to depend on everything you've already done. Anybody feel this? And you think to yourself, you know, I'm 45, maybe I need a career change. But you can't make a career change, can you? Because you'd have to start over. Like, anybody going to jump off that ladder and go back to $15 an hour? What do people make these days? When I started in construction right out of high school, well, actually in high school, I was making $7 an hour for sweat and labor. And you know what? The minimum wage was $4.25, and in high school, I was doing good. Yeah? You remember those days? I remember fuel was 85 cents a gallon back in the Stone Ages, 85 cents a gallon. And when it went up to $1, we thought the world was falling. Man, what celebration there would be if gas dropped to $1 a gallon. Some of us would just take a road trip because it was cheap to do. You get older, it's harder to change your plan. You continue to do the same thing over and over. And so God descends. He makes a very dramatic entrance. Now, I'm sure that Moses had seen a bush that was on fire and consumed, but he had never seen a bush that was on fire but not consumed. And so in the understatement of the whole Bible, he said, I'm going to turn aside to see this great sight. Interesting. And what was interesting to him was God that drew him into his presence. You notice that? What happened? So when Moses gets closer, God speaks to him, calls to him. He says, Moses. And Moses says, okay, bush on fire, not being burned is weird, but talking bush that's on fire but not burned up is weirder. Yeah? And so Moses, we can see, gets close enough, stops in his tracks, and he stands there. He responds to the voice, here I am. What else do you say? When God says, don't come any nearer, and take off your sandals, you're standing in a holy place. This is super important for the text. Because in the whole of Exodus, there's going to be the development of the tabernacle and the most holy place. And in the most holy place, a priest can go once a year to be in the, quote, presence of God. And yet here's Moses, what? In the presence of God. And in Exodus chapter 33, where this narrative is going, by the way, remember, God is always working on you and all his people at the same time. He's developing you for his people and his people for you. And he's carrying you along. And so God is going to take Moses on this spiritual journey and a physical one as well. And Moses is going to end up in chapter 33 in the presence of God, but not at the tabernacle. The whole story of Exodus is not about coming out of slavery. The whole story is about living in the presence of God. Deliverance is not a place. Deliverance is a condition of the soul. The presence of God is there, but we don't know the way. Jesus came to be the way, the truth, and the life. The presence of God is you're there, but you don't know the way. You know, finding landmarks is easier than finding people. Have you ever had this experience? If somebody says, look, I'll meet you in Sundance Square. This is what happens in Hallmark movies, right? They have like a 3-second conversation. So I'll pick you up at 7. and they don't even know where each other lives. They just met. Finding people is harder than finding landmarks. Here they are in the middle of nowhere. God finds Moses. And listen, for a lot of you, it was easy to find a church. But for a lot of us, it's hard to be a church because finding a building is easier than being what we're supposed to be. You came to church, but you're among the church. And God is saying, listen, my presence is a real thing, a real place, the there of this existence. And so Moses then responds. Notice what happens in verse 6. And he said, I am the God of your father. So this is God introducing himself. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Moses responds, hides his face, for he knows at least a little about the God of his heritage. God had been silent. God had been silent for years. This is many years later that God reemerges. And as of yet, they don't know God's name, Yahweh. That's going to be revealed as we move into this passage. I want you to see verse 7. Let's read the rest of our verse this morning. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Notice that. I want you to start seeing something very important in the next two chapters. The I, the first person pronoun, and the me, referring to God, is used many times here. God says, I have a personal interest in the direction and the destination of my people. You're going to go, but it's because I have noticed. So some of you are here today and you're wondering, if I'm supposed to walk in God's presence, does God even know? Listen, you're not going to get a word and a life transformation if God doesn't know. God shows up in your life to do His work. He doesn't show up in your life to do your work. He shows up to do His work. And this new direction that God is going to lay out for you, this new direction from God is a step at a time kind of change in your life. This is more like a GPS versus a paper map. Anybody remember paper map days? My family took a trip to Philadelphia one year. And I did a little counting. There were GPS at the time we went, so we didn't have this experience. But had we rewound to my childhood, again back in the Stone Age, it would have taken 7 maps for 7 states. And that would get you to Philadelphia. And then you would have to switch over to a Philadelphia map, probably a big Mapsco book, where you would find your region based on the address you had been given. And then when you got to the street, you remember this? When you got to the street you were supposed to be on, you would look at the numbers as they went by. Not everybody was faithful with their number posting. And so you drive along and you're like, I don't know. That was 2329, that's 2317, and that one is not listed. I think that's it. And so then you eventually take a gamble. You're going to walk up to that door and you're going to knock on it. And you're hoping just somewhere along the way they've got their name on a little ornamental placard, or they've got, they just can see the numbers or whatever, and you go to knock, and there's no video doorbells, and so whoever's showing up at the door, you hope you know them. You remember that? That's fun. Those are fun days. And some of us imagine that God is going to come into our life and He's going to lay out the map and He's going to say, look, here's where I'm taking you. You're here now, and here's where you're going. I am convinced none of my children can read a paper map. If they had to get from here to downtown Fort Worth, if the GPS stopped working, they would get stuck somewhere along I-35 and call me. That's what would happen. What else would you do? It didn't say turn left. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Some of you young people are like, you're giving us a bad rap. I'm giving you the rap you deserve. You plug in your place, you hit go, and it tells you left, right, left, right. Now, in the early days, I've been down some dirt roads that I'm pretty sure were supposed to be paved because it was probably a mistake. If you don't look at the whole route, you end up in some weird spots, right? So, our direction from God, we hope, would be a whole layout, but it never is a whole layout. God simply says this. He says, listen, I've seen them. I know what's going on. I know their problems. And he says, so I'm sending you. Verse 10, come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Boom. New direction in life. Of all the people that could be qualified for this, basically, God says to Moses, I know you've been watching these sheep for a while. My mass of people are in Egypt being oppressed by an oppressive ruler, the world power, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. So, hey, Moses, I'm just going to send you over there to bring them out. You would do what Moses says. You would say this back. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? That is the question. That is exactly the right question if we're thinking in a human frame. You see, the there of God is super scary because what God calls you to be and what God calls you to do is beyond what you are now and beyond what you know you can do. It is a total change of heart and rationale and reason. It's a complete 180 from where you're at, and God just throws it out there like it's no big deal. But I want you to see the competition of the first person pronoun, the I. I have seen, notice what God says. Verse 8, I've come down to deliver them. So in other words, I showed up. My presence is going to do this. I have come down. I see it personally. I know the problem. I made a promise. It says, in fact, here's where you're going. You're going to a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a good and a broad land. Moses, I wonder if he's thinking, that's great. Who's going to lead us out? Just figuring maybe God was telling him this stuff just so he would know. You ever sat in church and you're like, man, God's really talking to some other folks in here. Glad I got to sit in on God's scolding of them. Like being the younger brother, watching your older brother take the heat. You're like, well, I was involved in that too, but I want to sit back. He deserves it for both of us. God is always talking to you. And so he says, look, here's the there. A good and spacious land, a literal place, and I'm going to take you to. It's the land of promise that I gave to Abraham back in the day when I made a covenant with him. And I'm fulfilling that covenant, and Moses, you're the guy, so go get this done. That is not much of a plan, by the way. If you came in my office tomorrow and you said, hey, Kevin, I got a plan. I want to go to India and save the whole nation. Sign me up, send me. I would say, that's a great aspiration for you. But what's your plan? That's what I would say. God, on the other hand, says to Moses, I'll let you know what's going on as it happens. He doesn't even say he has a plan. He just says, Moses, you're the guy. I've selected you. Not because you're capable, not because you're qualified, not because you're competent, but because you're the guy. So get up and go. And Moses says what we all say every time. Look, who am I? I got my life here. These sheep, this wilderness, the sand is great. It's only mildly hot here most of the year. I really don't want to make this change. And yet some of us are desperate where we're at, but unwilling to follow God to where He desires to take us. We feel that the call of God is more desperate than our current brokenness. And God gives Moses this reassurance. Verse 12. And it's the reassurance that He applies to us. He says, but I will be with you. And here's your sign. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. Catch the sign. Here's what God says. Listen, I'm going to send you, and you're going to come back. That says a lot. I'm going to send you, and you're going to come back. We were in South Asia, and we were a little separated from our group, and we thought about taking an Uber into town. And me not knowing much, we were separated from our guide, and Tracy's like, we should go. Let's catch an Uber and let's go into town. If you're driving around in this place, there are no road rules that I'm aware of, except the implicit ones that govern their consciences. And I don't know where their consciences come from. But there's no real rules. So you catch an Uber and you get into town, and then you go mill about in the bazaar, and you can do your shopping and all that kind of stuff. But my question was this. How do I know where to catch the Uber on the way back? My great fear was not about getting there. I'm sure we would get to somewhere. My great concern was about how we get from somewhere back to here. And I tell you what, as Westerners in this location, it would be easy to get lost or to be caused to be lost until certain sums of money were paid. And so I had this anxiety. I know we could get there, but could we get back? And God says, listen, here's your sign. The sign is that you'll complete this. That'll be your sign. Here's the sign God is giving to you that He is going to change your direction. He will fulfill His work in you. That's the sign. Now, the problem with that is we want to say, okay, no. You got to show me the money before I go. I want the miracle now that validates what you're saying is not absolutely crazy, because I don't know, burning bush, talking bush, either one is not enough to deliver the people out of Egypt from the world power of the day. You're going to have to do more than that, God. I want to see, I don't know, a nuclear blast on the horizon or something. I want to see something that's got some real teeth to it before I commit to this plan that you have. That's not a plan, it's an aspiration. And God's response is simply that I will be with you. That's it. You see, the new direction is a life of worship. Here's what worship is. We teach our kids this. Worship is a right response to God. That means in the moment. So everything in life must turn toward the Son. It must turn toward worship. Your life has to have this sense of turning toward God as the sunshine of life, the one who gives all and provides all for you. This new direction in life is a life of worship. It's going to cause you to do things that are in response to who God is and where God is going. And that means broken and lost portions of your life have to be submitted up to God. That means forgiveness. Listen, you realize forgiveness is not just emotional well-being for you, but it is a response to God, a right response to God, a response of worship. When you say, Lord, I'm going to yield this and forgive, you're responding rightly to God. And so this new direction is going to include forgiveness for others. It's going to include a transformation of your wealth profile, of what you do with your money, of how you gather your money. It's going to change your relationships. You're going to have to, dads and husbands, you're going to have to go to your wife and your kids, and you're going to have to say, I was on the wrong track, and I want to take us on the right track. You might have to leave a job. You might have to do hard things with your kids. You might have to reset everything you expected. I mean, I don't know. Maybe shepherding was a top-tier job. I don't think it was. But maybe you have a top-tier job, and God is going to change that and transform it. The question is just simply this. When God shows up and says, listen, I know you've been here, but I want to take you to there. And you say, there's no way, that's impossible. Listen, that's where churches go to die. Is when they say, no, this is who we are. This is what we do. Never mind where God's leading, this is what we do. That's where churches go to die. And they go there because the hearts of their people become set on what was rather than on what God is doing now. They become nostalgia as vision rather than God's next as vision. Every generation faces the same challenges in a church. We have to continue to communicate who God is and what God does and His calling to individuals for every demographic, for every person in our congregation. And the moment we stop, whether that's in our personal life or in our church life, is the moment we begin to deteriorate in our faith. There can begin today. Notice what happens. God just simply says, listen, I'm going to send you. Moses says, I don't think that's going to work. But here's the thing. God was going to deliver His people. Notice, He says this. He says, I've seen everything that's going on. So here's what God does. God confronts you where you are. And I want you to notice something. God doesn't say to Moses, listen, you're a broken wretch. Right? He doesn't say to Moses, listen, you're totally unqualified, but just let me give you a little God magic and you'll be okay. God totally ignores who Moses is. He ignores everything that Moses has done. Everything that's in the background, He doesn't even mention it. He just says, here's the deal. Follow me with what I'm doing. Now, I didn't know about you. That seems unwise on God's part. But it seems like a pretty sweet deal if you're Moses. It's a sweet deal because there are things back there that I know are frustrating to God. God doesn't start with you're a wretch. He just says, you're my guy. Come on, let's do this. And today God says the same. Listen, you're my guy, you're my gal. Let's do this. God's going to deal with the sin of the past. He's going to deal with the brokenness that's there, and He's going to deal with all that stuff. But He deals with it along the way, redemptively, to equip, train, and better you, not to break you and tear you down. So God confronts where you are. God tells you the problem. And listen, here's the problem. God made a promise, and it's time for God to fulfill that promise. And I tell you, God is fulfilling His promises through Jesus Christ in you. He says, I'm making you a new creation. Behold, the old is gone, the new has come. He's making you into that new creation. He's taking you to that new land. And in order to do that, God is going to fix the impossible issue because of who He is. So what's the impossible issue? What has you hung up on responding rightly to God's invitation? You see, I said this whole passage is about accepting God's new direction. So what is that direction you need to accept? Let me lay out some things. For some, salvation through Christ is the new direction. The old has to be old. You need salvation through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. You've been trying to earn being good enough. That's why you showed up today. You're hoping there'll be a magic trick for you, something to fix a few pieces of life. And I want to tell you something. God is an all-in kind of God. He says, listen, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to walk with you. But you know what? You're going to do my work. And so He's called you. And it's not because of your merit, but because of His grace. And He said, listen, all who would come, you come. And today I say to you, some of you, the new direction for your life is salvation through Christ. Because never before have you trusted Him fully for salvation. You've been trying to earn it, but that's not trusting. That's called working. Christ has offered salvation freely to you. And some of us, the new direction we need to accept is a calling to full-time pastoral, church planting ministry, mission, whatever it is. You need to say yes to the Lord because He's working on you in that regard. And you can see His hand, and you've put it off, and you've allowed yourself and your own ambitions to get in the way, or you're young and you're not quite sure yet. Oh, is God going to do this or not? Listen, I want to tell you something. All of you are called of God. We say yes to God, whatever that is. And I tell you today, He's called to you. Say yes. And for some of you, that's going to be yielding to that pastoral work or that church planting ministry or that missional life or whatever it is. And that's going to be done in some vocational manner. You know, we're running out of pastors. You know that? Average age of pastors has gone up by 10 years in the last 20 or so years. Meaning our guys are getting old. We're not replacing them with new guys. Nobody wants to pastor. You know why? Nobody wants to get beat up their whole life, make less than market wage and do all that kind of stuff. But listen, when God calls you, that conviction is enough. You take the beating, you take the pay cut, you do what you got to do because it's the calling of God. And listen, all of us need that vigor in our life, that kind of conviction. For some, your new direction, what you need to accept is the life change you've been putting off. You got something that's got a hold of you. And God has called you out, and you've been having this resistant conversation with God for a long time. God has said, come, I'm sending you. And you have consistently been saying, look, not me. I can't do that. That's not my style. That's not my way. I'm not that kind of guy. I don't work that way. And so what continues to happen is you continue to feel that discontent. You continue to put God off, and God just keeps working on you. You say, look, I'm not sure. I can't make that life change because if I make that life change, how do I know that this is from God? That's exactly what you're asking if you're Moses right here. You're stuck at verse 12 because the guarantee is on the other side of obedience. The payoff is on the other side of obedience. And you're waiting to be obedient until God proves Himself. Listen, your salvation is proof. You're bought with a price. You belong to Him. You have a new master. So the payoff is already in it. You will worship God face to face. The payoff is there. You're waiting for something of this life rather than the next, and it's got you stuck. And so for some of us, the new direction that you need to accept is a life change you've been putting off. So I'm going to ask you to stand. We're going to move to our decision time. And these are the questions for us. Here's life change before us, a new direction from God, and the call to accept. And are you willing? Lord, we thank you